From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with the Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm in the Madison office to share an interview I did with Senator Kelda Royce, a Madison Democrat. We talked a little bit about the state budget that was enacted last week and some of her feedback. She voted against the state budget. So here's what she had to say. All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator Royce, for joining me on the podcast today. I think to start off with our budget overview, we can just talk a little bit about the budget process. You know, Governor Evers he reached an agreement with GOP lawmakers. It was a little bit of a different process compared to past years. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, I would say one of the biggest differences, besides the fact that there was a negotiation and an eventual agreement, was just how delayed the process was. It was very unpredictable. The Republicans sort of couldn't decide whether they wanted to participate or not in the negotiations, and it was they kind of walked away a couple of times and then ultimately came back. But because of that, it was a really compacted time frame in which we were actually debating the budget, and that means that a lot of the items that would have normally gotten time and press and public input, really, we weren't able to get that. And, that is unfortunate because I think it's a disservice to the public if they are not able to track what's going on.
Yeah, so you voted against this budget. Could you tell us just a little bit about why you decided to oppose it?
Sure. My vision for Wisconsin is a place where every child, no matter who you are or where you're from, that you have the opportunity to thrive here. And that means the freedom to go to a great school. And I view public education and creating opportunities for our kids as among the most important responsibilities we have in the legislature. This budget simply does not meet the standard for providing our kids with what they need. And when you have an environment where there's high inflation and our schools have not gotten an inflationary increase in 15 years, offering $0 for general school aids is just absolutely unacceptable. To have no increase whatsoever in general school aids, that's a cut. And 2/3 of districts are going to lose money relative to in the last budget, according to DPI's figures. To me, that's unacceptable. I also care about early childhood education because we know that that's the best way to set our kids up for success is for them to have access to high quality early childhood education. And by the way, it's also really important for our workforce that parents have affordable childcare, places where their kids can go and not just be safe, but to thrive and learn. This budget did not, I think, do what was needed in the childcare program, despite some progress in that area. And finally, higher ed. We need all the doors of opportunity open to young Wisconsinites. And that means opportunities to go to the trades. That means opportunities to serve in the military, to go to one of our great technical colleges, private college, and certainly the universities of Wisconsin. And this budget really shortchanged UW after, many, many years of the university being functionally defunded.
Yeah, so there's a lot of things you obviously had concerns about. What are some of the wins in the budget for you?
Well, I think having a small increase in the municipal services payment fund is a good thing. This is basically the state paying its bills to municipalities where it owns buildings that it doesn't pay property taxes on. So if you own a house or if you're a renter, you pay property taxes directly or indirectly for things, the public services that you receive from that municipality. Now, if the state owns buildings, they don't pay their bills. And so over time, those payments have shrunk to be about only 30% of what the state is actually receiving. So having a small increase, I think, is good. And that's going to help property taxpayers, because obviously when you have properties that are not paying property taxes and they're not paying the fair share of the cost of those services, then those expenses get shifted onto everybody else, onto the renters and homeowners and small businesses in those communities.
Okay. Yeah, I also want to get into, kind of the discussions around the budget involving Senate Democrats a little bit more this time around. Do you think that the thinner margins in the Senate for Republicans kind of force them to bring Democrats to the table? And how do you see that whole situation? with some.
Yeah, there's no question that Republicans, they lost all 4 competitive seats last time. Democrats swept the table, and they only had 18 members. You need 17 to pass anything. And right off the bat, they had several members that were saying they were not going to vote for the budget, or they were unlikely to vote for the budget. And I think that made it very, very difficult for Senator LeMahieu to manage his caucus, right? If he couldn't produce those votes, we were saying all along he's going to have to come to the Democrats, and we were open, we were ready to talk, we were ready to negotiate, because I think we understand, Senate Democrats understand the necessity of passing a budget and taking advantage, in this instance, of the hospital assessment and getting that deadline done before the federal bill was passed, the budget bill, which is a horrible, horrible bill. But we needed to beat them in order to bring this money into the state. Yeah, I think it took them too long to recognize their own political reality, but I understand it's a hard thing to do, to recognize, hey, I'm not able to actually marshal my own caucus for this, and I have to go to the other side. And Senate Democrats were very united throughout this whole process that we would not be picked off one by one. You know, we're not going to be bought off by a bridge or a project or some pet funding. We were going to be united as a bloc, and we were going to make decisions together as a caucus, and we did that. And I think it was good to see that we had made the budget better than it would have otherwise been if Senate Democrats had not been at the table. More special ed funding, certainly all the building projects at UW that had been put on ice and denied time after time. The municipal services payment fund. There were a number of things that we got in the budget that are really essential, and that wouldn't have been there without Senate Democrats at the table.
Yeah, there were also some areas that were left out of the budget process, like the Knowles Nelson Stewardship Program. Are there any examples of things like that where you wish they could have been addressed more?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, stewardship, that's a really tough one for me, because that's,
Yeah.
you know, I have really strong family history with that program. My stepdad helped create that program and named it Knowles Nelson. And, you know, it's been such a huge success for our state. Tourism is our #3 industry, and it has so much to do with the fact that we have beautiful, wild, natural recreational places all over the state. I mean, you do not have to go far to find incredible places to play, to ski, to hike, to fish, to hunt. And that's part of what makes Wisconsin great. So to see that program essentially killed by Republicans, it has been really sad. I have a sliver of hope that maybe we can do some standalone legislation to help it limp along, because ultimately I think this is going to be a political disaster for the Republicans, to turn their backs on really important constituencies of outdoorsmen, sportsmen, and, you know, families that just, this is one of the great things about living here. So I think my hope is that they're going to recognize that political reality and actually come to the table and pass something to keep Knowles Nelson alive.
Yeah, were there any other areas you saw as missed opportunities?
Well, certainly. I mean, corrections comes to mind. It's an enormous chunk of money that we're essentially just setting on fire, because we are so behind the times. We're so far from doing best practices and evidence-based corrections to reduce crime and reduce recidivism, which ultimately should be the goal, right? The goal is not to just incarcerate as many people as possible. It's to keep our neighborhoods safe and to make sure that every kid can grow up without the specter of violence in their community. And but what we're doing is not investing in those things that keep neighborhoods safe and keep communities and families free from violence, and instead setting money on fire in this system that does not do what it's supposed to do in terms of rehabilitation and creating public safety. You know, the governor put forth a plan, and Republicans rejected it, and they've not put forth any plan. And I think, you know, it was great to see the governor taking some leadership on this issue finally, after, you know, continuing to spend more on prisons than we do on the universities of Wisconsin year after year, and saying like, this is unsustainable and it's time for Wisconsin to get with the times and join other states that are doing much more smart investments to reduce crime. And I'm not talking about like New York and Illinois or Michigan. I'm talking about Kansas, Texas, Oklahoma, right? Really red states that just have decided it's really dumb to spend all this money on something and get such poor results.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, what are your big takeaways from this budget and what do you want to see improved upon in a future budget?
Well, I think the main thing is that we collect all this public input, right? We have hearings around the state and we all sit in a big long row and sit there hour after hour and listen to people's testimony. But what's really disappointing is that the things that people say that they care about and that they want us to do, those just get thrown in the trash by the Republican majority. And I think about public education funding, childcare, health care, expanding Badger Care, and protecting Medicaid in general, funding for the universities of Wisconsin, housing, all of the things that people said that they cared about and wanted prioritized were the things that the Republicans refused to fund and refused to prioritize. And to me, that's really disappointing because, these are people that had to take off work. They had to find childcare. They had to get transportation. They sat and waited all day to have their 2 minutes at the microphone. And rather than take that with sincerity and take that as a directive, hey, this is our job. It's to provide what people are telling us is important to them. They were just ignored. And I think that's, it's no wonder that people feel frustrated with government if the things that people broadly agree on, right? These are not crazy partisan issues. Healthcare, education, everybody needs to go to the doctor. Everybody wants their kids and their communities to thrive. You can't have those things if you don't have healthcare and education. And yet those are the very things that were on the chopping block.
Okay, well, thank you again for coming on the podcast and kind of sharing your perspective on the budget.
Absolutely, Kate. Thank you for your time.
All right, everyone, thank you for listening to this week's podcast. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about the state budget, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. For now, I'm Kate Morton. Thank you for tuning into WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.